Hi, this is MP Clem again, joined by Bingo, Neo, Smoking Cricket, and special guest Imposter Coster. Hopefully this time it will work and we can hear each other just fine. I think we're going to start all over. We're going to ask Bingo how his draft went, and maybe he'll just give the same answer.
We'll do the micro version. We are very excited about it. We think that Discreto is the best GM in the league for good reason. It was fun to add Gyrette into our draft room this year. He's been a really interesting addition. We're super pumped about Russell in the first round. I think he's going to be an All-Pro too, along with Saluna. And like our value in the lower rounds, but also excited about JB Blacknall coming in the second round. He's going to push and hopefully start over Rambo very soon. And different kind of back than I've ever coached. Excited to coach a power back that way. He's a bowling ball built from brick and rock. He's going to be awesome.
Okay, I think we'll slide over to Cricket, and hopefully this time we can hear him.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Super. All right, so Rams draft. We were relatively pleased with our haul this year. Taffy was away doing Taffy things, but he did give me a list of people that he wanted, and essentially our day one target, assuming he fell, was Jared Self, and that happened. And our day two target was Jeremy Starks, and that happened. And our day three target was Kevin Marshall, and that happened. And I think with the rest of the draft, I tried to balance out needs with value, particularly taking somebody like Dunn in the third round. And safety is usually a position that falls a little bit, so I was real happy to see Ethan Crockett. It was a pretty good value pick in the fourth round. And Norman Spencer may be lower rated than most of the other receivers, but if he does the same job he did in college, I'll be just fine with him.
All right. I think we'll have a joint answer from Neo and Imposter, so you guys can kind of tag team this if you want.
You can start, Ian.
Sorry, which question is this? I was absent when we started this.
Just how you think your draft went and how pleased you are.
Yeah. I mean, I feel pretty good about it. Obviously, everybody feels like the draft could have gone better, and everybody feels like the draft could definitely have gone worse. We were patient a couple times. We thought about trading up, and we sort of waited and let guys fall to us, and it worked out sometimes. It didn't work out sometimes. Really love getting Corey Davis in the first round. Strong safety was a need for us. We've had sort of like an average guy there, and Davis is the best strong safety in the draft by most people's standards. I feel like he's can definitely give us a boost in the secondary where we've had a lot of issues. Round two, picked up a tight end, big receiving threat, a little bit of a different tight end than we've had before. Spec Davidson was always sort of small and stout, despite being a good receiver, whereas Patrick Glass is really tall. I think he's like 6'6". So that's exciting. Toma Tumali, one of our favorites. Glad we got him as a guard in the third round. Did not think he would fall that far. So overall, I think I like the way our draft went. Could have gone better, but could have been a lot worse. And I think that's about all you can ask for.
There are a lot of guys that are waiting and missing out on, but overall, I'm pretty satisfied with our draft.
Okay. Well, I think I'll talk just briefly. I will like to, again, blame the Broncos for taking a guard they didn't need in the first round when they could have let him drop to us. But we're really happy to get Ian Hendrickson. We think he's going to fill in very nicely for us. Again, we wanted Marcus Williams the second round, and I think I'm pretty glad he didn't fall to us now. I think getting I forgot his name already. Elijah Harden was a good pickup for us. So I think overall our draft was pretty good. We did take a kicker and a punter, so that's not going to, put us up on high anyone's draft boards. But I think we did pretty well ourselves. So I think we'll start to the first question. First question is, who do you think was the most surprising first round pick? Who you most shocked to see go in the first round? And I think this time we'll start with Cricket.
So for me, that was actually Brett Fisher going to the Ravens. I didn't know if Fisher would be a first-round pick. It seemed like most teams were relatively set at quarterback, and there were enough big-time free agents. I mean, and Fisher fits a need. He fits Baltimore's offense or whatever that offense might happen to be. It's a relatively weak division, but I was actually pretty shocked to see Fisher as a first-round selection. I didn't think, I thought he had the talent to do it, but I didn't think he'd be taken in the first. I thought he'd slide to the second.
They picked at 44th. I think they might have traded up for that pick. Do you think they could have gotten Fisher at that pick and maybe gone with someone else in the first round? That seemed like an odd pick.
Well,
Quarterback.
I think that I actually think the Titans would have taken Fisher had he been available at 33. So I don't know if they would have gotten. I don't know if they would have gotten Fisher in the second. I actually think Tennessee would have taken him. But I was a little surprised to see them trade back, and then because I figured once they've traded back the first time, they would actually try to trade again out of the second. I mean, out of the first and into the high second. But no, that's not what they did.
Okay. I think we'll go on to Neo next. Neo, who was your most surprising first-round pick? Neo? Okay, we'll skip and go to Bingo. Bingo, who was your most surprising first-round pick?
I went the other way with it. I was surprised that that the Browns had the fortitude to take C.J. Thomas. I was very surprised to see that he went before Akil. Not that I think it was a bad pick. I actually had those players rated that way on our board, but I was surprised that they would make that trade and that C.J. Thomas went in the top 10. I think it's a great pick for them, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. In fact, the whole Browns draft, I think, was one to spend a little time on. But I was very surprised that Thomas got taken as early as he did. But happy for one of Franz's guys he recruited out of in Georgia, and I think it's a good choice.
Okay, yeah, I think it was not so surprising, but I think most people still felt that Akil was going to go first, even with all C.J. Thomas's combine hype. So we're going to ask Neo again. Neo, if you can hear us, can you please let us know who your most surprising first-round pick was?
Yeah. So I was really not expecting Aaron Blakely to go 4th overall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not that it's necessarily a bad pick. It's just not one I was expecting. That may have been partially just because of the way our board fell. But, yeah, I was really expecting somebody else up there.
And what do you make of after the pick, once Akil Morris was taken, the Bucs trying to trade Blakely for Morris straight up? What do you think led to that decision for them?
Honestly, I have no idea. The Bucs have made some rather head-scratching decisions to me. It seems like they're sort of torn between two different strategies. And either one of them could theoretically work, but I think they're sort of not really sure which direction they want to go, and they sort of just up and decided to take a shot and see if they could change course right after they took Blakely. But I'm really not sure what's going on there. It's a bit of a head scratcher.
Okay, so Coster, same question to you. Who's your most surprising first-round pick?
I'm actually kind of surprised by the Texans' pick of Arturo Pacheco in the later first. Personally, Pacheco wasn't the second best running back on the board, nor were there any more than Rodgers that deserved to go in the first. I know running back is a need for the Texans, but I think this one in particular was a little bit of a reach.
Who would you like them to take instead there at 22? They're kind of in an odd position. I think they traded down with New England because their top 13 didn't go the way they liked. But who do you think they would have taken elsewise? Or should have taken?
It's hard to say who they would have taken there. They may have been able to pass another trade down. That said, Pacheco at 22 feels like a reach, but I'm not exactly sure who they could have taken there, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
Quick note on the Texans. We do know it came out in the media that they were trying to trade up in front of Green Bay in the top 10 to try to get Lucas Hurd. So interesting note there. They may have just decided to go elsewhere after Plan A maybe didn't work out for him.
Texans draft in general feels like they were constantly trading down after their guy got picked and going with second or third or fourth options. And the draft is in whole feels weak for what the roster needed. Okay. I think we can move on to our second question then. We'll start with Neo this time. Neo, who do you think was the biggest reach in the draft?
I'm going to go with Jared Self. Overall, I like a lot of what the Rams did, and defensive end were sort of going fast and furious, almost from the get-go. So I understand, if you want a defensive end, you sort of had to just take your shot at him. And maybe the ones they liked better were gone, or maybe they had a higher grade on Self for than we did. But personally, I would not have taken Self anywhere near the first round. I was definitely not a fan. Hopefully he works out in LA, but again, I thought that was a pretty big reach.
Okay. I think what we just heard from Cricket when he's talking about their draft is they had Jared Self as their day one target, so they obviously had a different conclusion than you, but I still think it's a valid response. So I think Cricket will go to you then. Who do you think was your biggest reach?
Well, for me, I think the biggest reach was the Texans taking Pacheco, somewhat for reasons that Neo's already described. Essentially, I wasn't terribly. I think the Texans have had a thing where they wanted a superstar for a long time, and trading down and trading around and the way that they moved around in the draft, trading the 12th pick to New England and then taking Pacheco, it just struck me as a bit odd for what they needed and what they could have gotten at 12.
I think what we see the Texans do year after year is the same thing. Is they try and hope for someone to fall for them, and then when it doesn't happen, they trade down and take lesser skilled players, and it just hasn't worked out for them. So I guess we'll ask Bingo now. Who do you think was your biggest reach?
I went with Jordan Harris, number 33, taken in the top of the second round. I think we have covered that the Titans were looking to take quarterback there, ideally Fisher. And so when they got to that spot and Fisher was gone and they didn't want to reach on another quarterback, I think they went with the kind of hype machine of Jordan Harris, who had the killer combine and solid rating coming in, but I don't think that we just don't know anything about his competition level. So I think it's a reach at the top of the second round when there were some great players available. In particular, there's a host of players that I thought would have been better for the Titans with all of their injury problems. Even Sean Bell would have been interesting right there. They kind of had a question mark at running back last year, so there were a number of folks that I thought they could have taken, and I think Jordan Harris, the hype machine, got to him and made it a bit of a reach.
Well, I don't think they would have taken Sean Bell because they just took a running back in the second round in the last year's draft. I think they got Chris Bell.
Yeah.
I don't think he showed much this year, though.
Stands.
Yeah, I understand and I agree. But I don't think he showed a lot enough to be in the same category as what Sean Bell possibly could be.
Okay, that's fair. So I think we'll move on to Coster now. Who was your biggest reach?
So mine's a little bit of a weird answer because it's less about the pick itself and more about the team trading up to draft him. The Chiefs traded up with us to take Isaiah Hall, who I wasn't particularly fond with. Granted, we had that defensive end run earlier, and of course they're going hot. You might as well try to draft them. But Isaiah Hall did not impress me one bit. Contained defensive end, which most teams aren't necessarily fond of. Didn't look very great in his pro day. Combine wasn't astounding. But Chiefs traded again, or more particularly, they wanted us to draft him so we could trade it to them. But Hall's not exactly a good defensive end in this draft, so I'm more confused about their move to trade up to take him.
They traded with the number 40 pick for you guys, and I feel like Isaiah Hall might have still been available at number 40, because I can't see many teams in that 28 to 30 or 28 to 39 that would have taken a risk on him, just because he had really poor stats and really kind of a poor combine. Do you think he would have been available at 40?
That's hard to say, given a few teams on the list, but I can see him going to 40. Again, you said didn't really show up that much at Bowling Green. A lot of question marks about him. Definitely could have been there 40.
Okay. So I think we'll start with cricket this round again. At the Packers, which team had the best draft?
So for me, I thought the Broncos had the best draft, and I actually, spoiler alert to the rest of the audience, we changed it so that the Packers could not be selected for this. But I actually picked the Broncos beforehand, and my rationale is this: if you have 2 picks in the top 10, it's pretty easy to hit them both, or at least to give the impression that you hit them both. Which is why I also didn't pick the Browns for this. But I thought the way that the Broncos drafted both at the top of their draft and in the middle and the later part of their drafts, filling out the holes in their roster in a way that also made sense with their coaching philosophy, the other teams in their division, I thought it was probably the best all-around draft.
And I will say I still have eternal hatred for the Broncos for taking Russell Benson Gifford when they didn't need a guard. But we'll switch over to Bingo and let him talk about which team he felt had the best draft.
Well, I think the Browns had the best draft, and it kind of feels weird to say that, but I just think they absolutely knocked it out. I think their 2 picks in the top 6 were great. I was a big Cameron Marshall fan going all the way through. But they really made hay for me. At the end of the draft, they had solid, if unproductive, guys in the 3rd round, 4th round, and then the one that I was so surprised about was Matthew Dobbs in the 7th. He had a little bit of a fallback this last year in 2019, yardage wise, but his completion percentage went back up from 2018, and his touchdown interception ratio I thought was great, 21-6. Kind of getting back to his crazy 2017 when he had Jerry Ashad-Dodd that he threw the ball to, when he was completing 69% of his passes for 4,300 yards and a 29.5 TDI&T ratio. I thought they had a nice. I'm not super hot on the Gabriel Beauchamp pick in the 3rd, but I would have been really upset if they had taken him in the 2nd. But they waited to the 3rd, and they got a decent tight end out of Tulsa and Antonio Heath in the 3rd. So. Surprisingly, I'm going to go with the Browns.
Okay, yeah, I think they had a really good draft, and Beauchamp's not a guy that I think I would have taken at all in this draft, but if you need a defensive end and there was an 80 overall guy available in the 3rd round, it's a fairly low risk take to there. They're not very expensive. They're typically pretty easy to move if you need to for a lower pick, so it's not a whole lot of risk involved there still. So I think we'll move to Neo. Neo, which team had the best draft in your opinion?
I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals. I absolutely love what Randy's been doing out there in the desert, barring trades after or before the draft that had to do with a certain quarterback, which I will not comment on, purely on their draft. I love what they did early their first 3 picks almost could not have gone better. Eli Austin at 30th overall. If we hadn't traded out of the 27th pick, that would have been our guy right there at 27. They got him at 30. Never quite hit his ceiling as far as potential at Tennessee, I feel, but very great physical specimen. Potential's through the roof. He could be a number 1 going forward with a little bit of development, I think. Eugene Malone at 34, a guy I would have taken immediately at 40, and not merely because of the college he came out of. Really good across the board corner. Not through the roof in any one thing, but a solid performer all the way around. I think he could be like a number 2 cornerback that for the next 10 years. And then 43rd, they took Omar McManus, who several members of our front office were absolutely in love with. I felt he was the best defensive end left on the board after Eric Jennings went at 15 to the Falcons. Absolutely love that pick. And then later on, not to sit here and just go through all of their picks, but a guy I love that they grabbed late in the 7th round, Christopher Sullivan, the guard from Texas. I think he's got a lot of potential. Then they got him at, I think, 200. Yeah, pick 200. So absurd value there in my mind. So yeah, absolutely love what the Cardinals have done.
Hey, and I will add real quick that the pick right before Christopher Sullivan, 199 for the Cards, Corey Johnson out of Mississippi State. Kid had a little bit of a slower 2018, but 2019 he came on with 6.5 sacks. And 32 tackles from the D tackle position. That's a hell of value. You are right.
It's even more impressive considering he was running back next to Tyler Jones.
Yep.
And I will add that the Cardinals took the only UVA player taken in the draft, so I do appreciate that, Randy. Also, Coster, we'll go with you. Who had your best draft?
All right, well, everyone's already taken really good teams off the board. I really loved what the Cardinals did, and as well as the Browns. I'm going to give a shout-out to the Chargers, though. I know there's controversy over first pick and Anthony Miller, but I really do like the pick there. Clearly second-best defensive end. He'll be an immediate impact on the Chargers' D-line. Tom Oldham's a guy that I was a little fond of. I think he's a good pickup at 35. Super fast. Love a pick there. Prince Williams, intelligence aside, this guy's got a ton of skill, and that's a super good pick at 51. Then at 67, they took arguably the biggest steal of the draft in my books, Zion Hopkins out of Michigan. That guy was a beast for the Wolverines in the down year. Absolutely love the guy. Really wanted him to fall to our next pick. But they'll get him there. Joe Morrison, trio of BC receivers. I thought that was a pretty nice pick for him. Robert Grant of Kentucky's all right at 113. They got Luke McHenry out of Ball State, the only punter taken, I do believe, and a really good one at that. And yeah, that sums up their draft. I do think it's a good draft. Not one of the definitely a good one for him.
Okay, and I'll say that the Colts really wanted Prince Williams in the second round. He went 9 picks before us, and we really wanted Luke McHenry in the 5th round. So they took 2 players we really, really wanted. So I hate the Chargers too. So now we'll go to a much more difficult one to talk about is worst draft. And I think we'll start with Neo. Who do you think had the worst draft?
Well, it feels like a little bit of a cop-out to say this, but I definitely have to ride with the Steelers here for worst draft. It's tough to have a good draft when you've only got 3 bites at the apple, and their first pick was all the way down in round 3, which, again, is really hard to pull off a good one. But Ronnie Bailey for your first pick. Ew. That guy just he made some plays as a number 2 guy in college. Everything about his draft process went as badly as possible. Terrible pick.
Okay, we're getting a little
And the
feedback
other two
here.
weren't exactly shining stars.
Yeah, it's for your team like the Steelers that have a lot of needs and you're kind of young at most positions. Having 3 picks in the draft is never going to hurt, especially picking first at 73. I know they traded a couple picks for PB Holmes, and I don't know if that's really worth tanking one draft to get a guard in another. So we'll see how they rebound. I still think that given the weakness of the AFC North, they still have a shot at winning the division title, but I think this draft makes it incredibly hard for them to do that. Then we'll move on to cricket. Who was your worst draft?
I actually thought that the Tennessee Titans had the worst draft. And the reason I think that, somewhat similar reasons to what I alluded to earlier. If you have 2 top 10 picks, it's easy to be rated as having a good draft. And if you have the number 1 overall pick, it's easy to be rated as having a relatively decent draft. And no complaints about Tyler Jones. He was everybody's number 1. But to me, the Titans last year were kind of like the Jaguars in 2018, a team that was better than their record indicated. And if you have the chance to draft high at each of the rounds, knowing that pound for pound you're going to get better talent, you should take advantage of it. And I don't know if the Titans totally did that. I actually think Jordan Harris would have fit much better on a team like ours. Whereas, like, for example, Jeremy Starks is going to be our nickel. Whereas Harris is going to have to play much higher up the order for the Titans. And then it always seemed like Tennessee kept delaying a quarterback and kept delaying a quarterback, and they try to pick around other needs. And I know we really wanted Kevin Marshall, and I didn't know when he would be taken. So and I actually tried to trade up for him a couple times, but I remember when we took Marshall, and we were really happy we got Marshall. I remember the Titans were just like, well, this is the end of the wagon. And they went out and then burned a pick on Julius McIntosh. I was pretty sure it was just going to be at UDFA. So for those reasons, I really don't like, the way the Titans went about the draft, given that they had a chance, I think, to do so much better.
Yeah, and given the talent at quarterback in free agency, it seemed almost unnecessary at a certain point to take a quarterback, especially if the quarterback you're going to take is Julius McIntosh. It would seem better almost to use that pick on literally anything else, and it wouldn't have been as shit on because Julius McIntosh is not a good player. He's not going to do anything in the pros. So I think that was probably one of the worst picks in the draft. Okay, Bingo, go ahead and answer the question, please.
I initially said the Steelers as well, but since Neil already had a chance to talk about that, I will mention another AFC North team that I think had a really poor draft. The Baltimore Ravens, I just don't know what they were doing. They took Fisher, which could be long-term a decent pick for them perhaps, but then they went free safety, offensive tackle, and then a guard that I'm like, what are you talking about? And then finally they picked my guy George Calvert from Minnesota, but I just didn't understand exactly what was happening with their draft and where they went with it all. So the double free safeties in 3 and 4 and not having a second round pick is tough. So I'm going to kind of slide a 1B in for the Ravens for having a weird draft.
Yeah, the Ravens brought in Dacter, and I think they're trying to just change their teams. I think they realized that what they were doing just wasn't going to work. But I don't know that they had formulated a strong plan, or maybe this is just the early workings of it, and maybe we'll all be proven wrong. But it seemed like, from my perspective, that their draft was kind of all over the place and not really coherent at all.
Agree.
Okay, Koster. How about you? Who had the worst draft?
Right. Well, I wasn't particularly liking the Dolphins draft. I don't hate the Dexter Flowers pick, given the value at number 19, but there's a lot of red flags about him. Supposedly had the worst combine of players. So there's obviously that. You have T.J. Lawrence in the second, who could be a solid player, but in a terrible Notre Dame defense, he didn't really do anything. Michael Williams is an okay pick. Can't really hate that. Nigel McKinney is a weird pick, mainly because he played defensive end for the 2019 season. I don't know what to expect out of him. Jaheim Lemons is, in my opinion, the worst pick in this draft. This guy had an awful pro day. You could argue value here, but this is a guy I would have just let slide through the draft. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Brent Willett of Georgia Tech in fifth. The supposed sixth-year senior. Not terrible, but not good. There's nothing exciting about the Dolphins draft. A lot of bad picks, or a lot of iffy picks. Not very many good ones.
Yeah, and I don't understand the logic of taking two safeties in the second round. You're going to be starting two second-round safeties, it looks like, the first year. And for a team that still has the components to contend for a division title, that doesn't seem to make sense to me, what you would want to put your team in that kind of position. McKinney's actually a guy I kind of liked, even though he had some red flags about him. I think Tim at 50 isn't bad, but yeah, Jaheim Lemons is just really a bad player. It's like him and Julian McIntosh, probably two of the worst picks in the draft, just because they were taken at all.
In defense of the Dolphins starting two rookie safeties, did not our Super Bowl champion start off the year doing that same thing?
That is very true. That is very true.
They had Prince McGill.
Yeah, that's true. I would take Prince McGill over either one of their safeties, but yeah, you never know. But I don't necessarily disagree there.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's definitely not to the caliber that the Niners did it.
Yeah, it's not ideal, to be sure. And ironically, the Dolphins being the team that could have had Prince McGill last year.
That's true, yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. I think we're going to start with Bingo first. Question is, what first rounder do you think went to the worst situation?
I'm going to go with either of the first round running backs, Rodgers or Pacheco. And I will. The small caveat here is that we had Rodgers first on our running back board. We would have loved to take him at 20 if he'd have been around. I think that'd been fine. I'm happy we've got Russell, but in my mind, he went to a team where he can. The guy who's most ready to start has to sit, and Pacheco, the guy who's not ready to start, has to play. So that's where I think those two guys went to the worst situations in the first round.
And we all know the Texans have had a lot of difficulty drafting running backs in their history. It seems like everyone they pick up just doesn't work out for one reason or another. And it's hard to imagine Pacheco breaking that trend.
Yeah, it just seemed like Rodgers, ready to roll right out the back. If you would have swapped those two teams and those two players, that would have been great. I think that Rodgers would have been fantastic in Houston, if they would have worked out a deal for that. But having to sit now behind their number one in Kansas City seems like a waste at 9, quite frankly, and a talent like Rodgers, where you trade back and maybe get a guy like Pacheco or Sean Bell that might need to grow a little bit. And then Pacheco, I think he's just going to be in over his head in this first year.
Would Rodgers really be the number 2, though? Don't they have Justin Buchanan as their number 1? So I think Kansas City would put Rodgers at number 1 immediately.
Yeah, Nimsy just said in the shot box that he plans on doing that.
Okay, we'll move on to cricket. Which first rounder is in the worst position?
I actually thought it was Dexter Flowers in Miami. And the reason is that Flowers had both character and injury concerns, which is sort of a problem if you have to make the guy produce right away. And unfortunately for the Dolphins, they're in a division where pretty much everybody could have made the playoffs. I think everybody was actually in the hunt for the playoffs. It's a relatively solid and evenly spaced division, and there's not two guys in front of Flowers. And so Flowers has to produce immediately, knowing that he has character concerns and he has injury concerns, and he may stall out with that amount of pressure.
Yeah, I know Dexter Flowers had a lot of hype coming into the offseason just because of his production in the season, but once Pro Day came out and the Combine happened, it seemed like everyone just tanked him on their draft board. So I think taking in a player who showed his ability on the field at that position is not necessarily a bad pick, but it's the other factors, I think, that really makes it a tough situation for him and Miami in general. And we'll move on to Neo. Who do you think is in the worst position in the first round? Or worst situation, I should say.
This was kind of a tough one for me, but I think I would go with defensive end Isaiah Hall to the Chiefs is the worst situation. Partially because I don't particularly like Hall as a prospect, especially in the first round, but also because of the rest of the defensive depth chart in the front seven for Kansas City. Not really sure if they're going with a 4-3 or a 3-4 defense there. They could theoretically do both. They have some personnel, but the two bookend defensive ends there are Isaiah Hall and the defensive end that they took a few picks later in the second round, Luke Lyles out of Vanderbilt, who actually I kind of like better than Isaiah Hall. But the two of them are definitely going to be starting, and they'll have to produce immediately without a ton of help in the rest of the front seven. Arlie LeClaire is a pretty decent player, even as he's getting a little older. And Devin Stevens is a guy who's developing nicely at weak side linebacker. But on that defensive line, there's not really a standout. So the Chiefs are sort of depending on Lyles and Hall to immediately make an impact. And I'm not really sure if either of them is up for the task.
I know we talked about double safeties, rookie safeties not being a good idea, but what about double rookie defensive ends? What kind of pressure can they really generate being in their first year playing together? That seems like an odd match to go with your front seven. And we'll move on to Coster. Coster, which first rounder is in the worst situation right now?
Yeah, I'm with Ian that this is like a super tough one to choose. We haven't talked about Brett Fisher here, have we?
We have not. We have talked about the Ravens a little bit, but not necessarily at this spot, no.
So at the moment, and this might not be long term, but at the moment, Fisher is a scrambler playing in a pocket scheme. He'll be developing under a quarterback with a completely different system, completely different offensive scheme, and that doesn't exactly help him out. He's a good talent. He won't be starting, sadly, but I feel like this will stint his growth until they move over to a scrambler-orientated offensive scheme.
So how long do you think the Ravens let this last until they put him in the starting position? I mean, it's hard to take a quarterback in the first round without making him become a starter in the first couple of years, in my opinion.
It should last only a year or two. Honestly, I think the longer they wait, the worse the situation becomes. they really just have to get Fisher into a scheme sooner. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on. We'll start with cricket this time. So this might be one of the harder questions. What late rounder, and this is defined as someone taken in the 6th or 7th round, went to the best situation for long-term success?
Well, I didn't want to be a homer and then take one of my people, so I'll actually go slightly off the wall, and I'll kind of piggyback off Imposter's answer, but for a different team. If Dylan Bishop was going to succeed long-term in this league, he has to go to a place where he's going to automatically be a backup, which I don't think is going to happen in most places, just because the way I think people value ratings and want to put rookies a little further down. So for Tampa, who probably wants to move to another quarterback they drafted, and I think Rabbit actually wants to long-term use Conroy as his starter. But until they move on from Hayden, the better backup is going to be Bishop. And so if something happens to Bishop, the easiest way to keep the scheme is for Bishop to play over Conroy. And we know that Bishop can ball, but if you have the rating concerns and some of the other questions that Bishop had, if you're a rookie, and you're not likely to be, playing in a big spot and you're drafting late rounds, it's just easier if you know you could get on the board. And I think that's what Bishop has the chance to do.
Well, and I know during the draft, Rabbit spoke about how they wanted to go to a more of a pocket scheme for quarterback. So I think that's why he took Devin Conroy. But then I don't understand why you would take a guy like Dylan Bishop there, just because he's almost the exact opposite type of player. So I really don't know what the Buccaneers are doing with the quarterback position. And I would think that Bishop probably is not in a good position just because the Buccaneers do want to move away from a scrambling quarterback type of offense.
Well, again, Conroy, I think Rabbit said, he wants Conroy to sit 2 or 3 years. And so in the middle of that transition, they're still going to use Hayden, but they need a scrambling backup or a hybrid backup. And Heisman Trophy winner. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but I think for a late round pick, that's probably about as good as someone like Bishop is going to do, to know that he's going to be an immediate backup for an extremely important position.
Okay, that's fair. I think we'll move on to Neo. So what person drafted in the 6th or 7th round is in the best situation for long-term success?
All right. So I'm going to go a little bit different. You don't always see this position highlighted in a question like this. Carter Leavitt, the strong safety out of LSU for the Lions. I had a really high rating on him. I think he's a very high potential player, and he's sitting behind a really good talent in Willard McCready, a guy who's young. So Leavitt's going to play special teams, and I think over time he could develop into a really good defensive player, but you won't have to throw him. The Lions won't have to throw him directly into the fire immediately. They've got some talent in the secondary, so he can sort of sit and learn. And I think they could eventually let McCready walk, and I think Leavitt has the potential to take over eventually.
So it'd almost be like they would use him to back up McCready, and then once McCready gets too expensive, they'll leave it out there on the field as a starter.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay. So then we'll move on to Bingo. Bingo, who in the late round, 6th or 7th, is in the best situation to succeed?
I'm going to throw a bone to my former colleagues at the New Orleans Saints, and they actually have 2 players, one taken in the 6th, one in the 7th. I think have some, or both in the 7th, sorry, both have opportunity to show up later in their career and be productive starters. Bruce Riley, a wide receiver out of Notre Dame, he had a solid career at Notre Dame, and I think brings a lot of talent and some consistency. 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns over the course of a couple of years, nothing to shake a stick at. So I think he will start in the 5th position on their depth chart, give or take, and then move up slowly. They have had a good run with Steve Alexander in the slot, and I think that's worth considering long term. But perhaps Riley shows up there later. And the guy they took after that, Barry Monk, is a DT out of Purdue, who's going to slot in behind in the right defensive tackle position, but may overtake whoever they've got in the other defensive tackle position. I'm going to take a look at that. At Monte Kelly. Maybe the 2-gap fits better there to be a long-term backup to Miller for Barry Monk. So I think the Saints picked a couple guys in the 7th round that have some long-term potential.
And the thing that we've started noticing now is that these late rounders are having less chance for success. So getting a guy here that even can be a backup, I think is a good pickup here, or is a smart take. Okay, Coster, 6th or 7th rounder who is in the best situation to succeed.
So I might head on over back to the Finns and take a look at Timothy Cano out of Indiana. He'll be sitting behind Marcus Berry, a pretty solid power back, and he'll be in a offense that I think fits the scheme quite well. Granted, he's played an interesting scheme of the Hoosiers so far, but when you're in an offense of Brown and all, it helps to benefit under some of these good players. Cano's a pretty good player. He personally tore me up this past year. I think he'll do well sitting behind Barry, and he'll easily overtake Will Fuller by the end of the year.
You think he'll take over Will Fuller already as a rookie?
Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible.
Fuller only went +1, I think. I agree with Poster. I had him on my initial cut list too.
Okay, lots of praise for IU. Not my favorite thing in the world. So we'll move on to question 7. We'll start with bingo. What division improved the most?
I think without a doubt the NFC North got better. We've talked a lot about the Packers draft. Kind of unbelievable for them to get those guys in the slightly mid first round. They just had a great draft overall. The Bears added some nice pieces. I think they improved where they needed to. I think the Lions had a great draft. Kind of hard not to when you got a guy like Franz picking for you, but it's just only the Vikings struggled. They had a decent middle part of their draft. Didn't love their first round, so I think that only really the Vikings out of the NFC North didn't drastically improve themselves, and the Lions and somewhat the Bears didn't really need to.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think really 3 of those teams had very solid drafts. I couldn't really name a division outside the NFC North that maybe had as high profile picks that they did. So I think that's a pretty good pick option there. Okay, Neo, which division improved the most, do you think?
Honestly, it's really hard for me to not say the NFC North. Like Bingo already mentioned, there's an elite draft, probably foregone conclusion as the best in the Packers. Love what the Lions did. Love what the Bears did. A lot of people sort of question the Akil Morris pick, but they were hard after the linebacker that fell to Saluna last year. They wanted him badly, didn't get him, so they went defensive tackle. That pick actually worked out for him this year. The highly rated inside linebacker falls to them, and they took advantage, jumped on it. I think it'll work out just as well, to be honest with you. Lions absolutely killed it in my mind. I think the only draft that I did not like in the NFC North was the Vikings. other than Donald Reed, I didn't really care for any of their picks. Weathers, I don't like Thomas Weathers coming out of Colorado as a corner, but he just the pre-draft process just ran over him like a rhinoceros or something. But he's good value in the third round at least. But the rest of the draft, nothing really jumps out at me. Ja'Cory Kessler has potential, but again, you're converting him from quarterback to wide receiver. Who knows what's really going to happen there? But it's hard to go against the NFC North. To me, they're far and away the number one pick.
Yeah, I think that's probably what everyone's going to come up with. It's hard to come up with a different option. So, Cricket, do you have anything besides the NFC North?
I had also selected the NFC North for this question. Although I actually, the main reason I selected was because I thought the Vikings at least had an average draft and not a clunker draft. There's a couple divisions that I think they had 2 or 3 teams draft really well, and then another team kind of had a clunker and didn't work quite as well. So with the Vikings, I actually was kind of hoping that maybe Kessler would come to us. I was kind of curious to see how he'd work out. I know that Trick plays the whole meme and everything, and I don't know if we would have done that, but I was actually kind of interested to see how that might work. But that didn't happen. But I think that for reasons that everybody else has said about the Bears actually going for Akil, I like that move. For the Lions, killing it overall, and then the Packers getting 2 of Saluna's 4 generationals. That's a definite improvement across the board.
Okay, so Coster, do you have a different answer, or are you gonna say the NFC North?
As a matter of fact, I don't have another answer.
Okay.
I will say I do like the Vikings draft a little more than everyone else here. Donald Reed is a pretty good pick. I like Kessler as a prospect. Definitely a project, but an interesting one at that. I couldn't care much for Weathers, but I think they got a small steal in Cody Albright out of Ohio State. I personally love him out of college. I think he'll be a nice backup to Vardell. Rest of the picks aren't bad, but not flashing by means. You guys have already summed up the rest of the NFC North. That was really good. I will give a shout out to the AFC West. Aside from the Chiefs' semi-below average draft, as a way to describe it, I guess, I thought each of them did really well too. Of course, Broncos getting Russell Benson, Gifford, Raiders stealing quite a few guys, Shavarine, Major Morris, etc. And you talked about the Chargers draft. I think the AFC South very much improved.
Yeah, I'd second the AFC West love. They to me they're probably the second best, but NFC North is just so far ahead. I couldn't not say them.
Okay, well, we will move on from that easy question. I thought it was going to be much more difficult, but turns out one division killed it. So I don't know. There really weren't as many trades this year, but what was the worst one that happened during the draft? And we'll start with Cricket.
Well, I think for me it was the 2020 7th rounder for the Chargers swapping for the 2021 Saints 7th rounder. There's not much to choose from, but really, this is not a trade that just needed to be happened. 7th rounders have non-guaranteed contracts. You can cut them. I just don't see. It's a trade for the sake of making a trade, which I don't think most of the other trades had a point, and I don't think this one did.
Okay. I think we'll move on to Bingo for this question.
I don't want to talk about anything that happened during the draft. I want to talk about that ridiculous Chiefs-Bills trade that happened afterwards. I'm sorry about that. And I know that the question was about the draft, but I think that there needs to be competitive balance in a trade. And when you trade an offensive tackle in his third year that's a 78 and a center in his second year that's a 76 and a sixth rounder for one center in his first year that's a 69, I just think that's ridiculous. And I'm sorry,
Pretty clear.
I've been terrible to you all night already, but I'm gonna pile on. I'm sorry, AFC West brother.
And I know those other two players that they traded weren't all-stars, but there is zero competitive balance here. I just don't understand how the league let this trade go through.
I don't blame the Chiefs because they're getting two solid players for nothing and a sixth rounder. I blame the Bills for not being able to manage their cap and for dumping players that actually have value into my division.
I don't understand how an expansion team can have cap issues while a team like the Colts are actually in fairly good shape. I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, I mean, to pile on with that one, frankly, I'm not even sure this is the worst trade similar to that. Again, I'll go ahead and applaud the Chiefs for taking advantage of a good deal here. But Tampa Bay pretty much got a bunch of free picks earlier this offseason for basically the exact same thing, but they got better picks. And of course, that one, I take a affront to that one because it's, someone gifting a team in my division free picks. But, some of these are just kind of ridiculous.
Yep.
We don't talk about that Tampa trade around New Orleans.
Yeah, that's not
Austin,
cool.
we're up to you. If what draft day trade was the worst?
Again, not much to choose from. I touched on it earlier, but I think the Chiefs trading up to get Hall was pretty bad. Not only was it a reversal of a trade that happened earlier, we literally swapped back to our original pick at 40. But they traded up to get a player that I don't think is going to be very great. And that's not worth it in the first round. But again, not much to choose from. That just happens to be at the bottom of that short stack.
Okay, yeah, there were not many trades this year to go through. Okay, so every year cornerbacks are a huge topic of discussion just because everyone seems to be cornerback thirsty. So which of the top cornerbacks, and you can just define that however you want, you can say top 3 rounds or which really any quarterback you want. So which cornerback is going to help their team the most starting in 2020? And we'll start with Neo.
All right, so looking around at where all the different cornerbacks went, I sort of had to take into account the cornerbacks that this team lost earlier in the offseason. The Cincinnati Bengals traded away Jacoby Severns, who had sort of been, a staple of their squad, for many, many seasons at this point. And then they, that left them with DJ Reed, second-year man out of Boise State, who's a 78 overall. Richard Lewis, who was a rookie last year. He's got nice size, but he's only a 75 overall. And then another young guy going in his third year, Kemp Jasper out of Arizona State. All man guys, so they're pretty scheme specific there. But 3 corners, and none of them scream number one in any sense of the word without Severns. So they go out and they grab a taller clone of Jacoby Severns, in my mind, in Ohio State's Blake Turner. I think this guy is pretty much they're plug and play, and he's going to knock all the rest of their corners down a slot. Reed goes from a number 1 to a number 2, which I think is great for him. Lewis goes to the slot, which I think is great for him. They traded him and they got a cheaper version of him back, cheaper and bigger. So we'll see how that goes, but hard to beat that one.
And it was the only way they could get a first-round pick because they had traded their first round this year to Cleveland. So trading Severns to get Turner, like I said, it's cheaper. And Severns isn't exactly a guy that you screams out to you as an elite player, so it's not necessarily a huge loss to them, I don't think. And we'll move over to...
Yeah, I think Severns was one of those guys that he didn't, turn around and he wasn't real flashy. He didn't turn around and make a lot of picks. he didn't, get a lot of touchdowns in a return game and stuff. But I feel like he's a guy who went out there and just sort of, took away part of the field at times, even if he was a little bit quiet about it.
Okay, and we'll slot over to Bingo for the same question.
I think it's hard to not go with Marquise Reed here. I think he's just going to be a monster for the Packers. Bring some versatility. They're smartly keeping him just as a cornerback and 6th on their receiver depth chart, I think, like that. But I think he's going to be, as Luna said, a generational talent and somebody in that position that the Packers have needed ever since they let my buddy from Minnesota go over to the Patriots, where he's just been so great. So I think it's Reed, long shot.
And yeah, taking Reed there at 8, I think is even a good value. I think Reed was probably a top 5 player who fell to 8. So I think all in all that the Packers really lucked out with Reed.
Very glad that Marquise Reed didn't last to number 9, because if he'd been in there at 9, I kind of would have regretted trading down out of that spot. Definitely expected him to go like top 5, but glad he went before 9, because I would have felt bad otherwise.
Okay, we'll move on to cricket. Which cornerback is going to help the team the most in this first season?
I actually would go with Cameron Marshall to the Browns, mostly because for the other top corners, there's at least somebody else in the secondary with them that can pretend to be a good player, or at least is a good player. But for the Browns, the rest of their secondary is just ass, my dude. And by default, Marshall is the best player in the Browns secondary right now. So it's hard to help your team out more when you now are the number 1 guy.
And Kadeem Martin has kind of been a bit of a disappointment. We drafted, we're hoping he'd be a much better player than he turned out to be for them, which sums up the Browns' history in drafting. So now we'll move on to Coster. Which cornerbacks can help the team the most?
In the short run, I definitely think it's going to be Marquise Reed. In the long run, however, I'd keep an eye out on a guy we've talked about earlier, Jordan Harris out of North Dakota State. Not put into the best position right now, starting as a cornerback number 2 as a rookie. I can tell you that starting rookie cornerbacks generally isn't a great idea. I like the potential this guy has, and I think we'll find out more about it as a season or 2 passes. I do like what he brings to the table, and I think if he doesn't get thrown into a terrible situation, he'll progress really well and turn into one of the better cornerbacks in the league, I feel.
I will say that starting a rookie cornerback is not a bad idea if he doesn't suck. So we'll move on to question number 10. Who did best in rounds 3 through 5 in the mid rounds? Who do you think had the best draft? And we'll start with Bingo.
As much as I didn't understand their first round draft pick in Blakely, I think Tampa Bay had an unreal 3 through 5. These numbers are just crazy. Jeremiah Newton, a solid back from Iowa, 1,400 yards both years, 14 and 16 touchdowns. Devin Conroy, we've talked about how amazing that guy can be after a couple of years. Michael Hernandez, the CB out of Alabama, in the 3rd, has just a solid stat sheet for the last 3 years. 4 picks and a touchdown, 3 picks and a touchdown, 1 pick and a touchdown, with 16, 8, and 4 tackles from 2019 back. And then to finish off that round with William Johnson, the tight end out of Michigan State that was so highly rated, though he didn't have the best year, even in the Big Ten. Luke Graff out of Nebraska had an unbelievable year. But you're getting a lot of talent in William Johnson at the bottom part of the 3rd round, and then they had the 4th round, the receiver out of Mississippi State, Richardson. I didn't love as much as the guy we took 1 pick later in William Doherty from USC. But 5th round, William Moore, wide receiver out of Boston College. His 2018, and I know it was Lee Shuer's last year, he had 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 94 catches. It's just nuts for a 5th rounder. And then Bobby Griggs at the end of the 5th round, defensive tackle out of Boise State, 23 tackles, 4 sacks. That's great production in the 5th round. I go with Tampa Bay.
I think that it helps having 4 third-round picks, but I think they really utilize those picks very well. I think I really like Conroy. I think he'll be a good player. I don't know if he fits them right away, so he'll have to sit a couple of years. But I think the rest of their picks were really good value picks that helps their team right away. Okay, cricket. Which team had the best 3 through 5th round picks?
Well, I could be a homer again. Not going to do that. So I'll pick on another team in our division. I really liked what the Cardinals did in the middle of the draft. I think that their first 2 picks in the mid rounds, Lesa and Weston, have a potential to connect well with each other in the future. I know that Randi coached Weston and probably knows how to get the best out of him. And taking tight ends probably in the 2nd or 3rd round is usually, I think, a good spot to get a very highly rated player. And I actually really liked Mark Hills. If we had taken a linebacker later in the draft, Hills was somebody that I was actually looking at. So I think that with the balance of the way the Cardinals set the middle of their draft up with the top of their draft, I thought they did the best job.
And I will say, I think they did really a good draft overall. And I think Randy's probably one of the best GMs in the league, if not the best. But I think Lesa for TCU, I think he played wide receiver this past year just because their depth chart was just so barren. So I think that brings a lot of value to what he will do with whoever they have as quarterback in the future. And I don't know that Weston's ever going to be a starter, but I think if a 4th round pick can develop into a really nice backup. And again, like I said, he won a national title with Weston, so he knows how to use Weston. And I will say that Mark Hills didn't do anything in 2019, had no stats. He was playing Will. So 2018, when he was a starter, he had some solid stats, nothing great. But, yeah, they did okay. So, Neo, up to you now. Mid-rounds, who did the best?
All right, so couple of my the 2 I was thinking earlier have both already been mentioned. So I'm going to go ahead and move on down the board and go over to a division rival. And this hurts my soul to say, but I really love has done a lot of great stuff with Sage over there running the show, and they did really well in the middle rounds here. Vontae Burnett in the 5th round is a guy that I thought should have gone a full round earlier. Absolutely love that pick. Despite the fact that he's from Northern Iowa, love his size. And then a relatively cornerback weak. They did really well. Sean Gunderson, the defensive tackle out of Marshall. This is a guy that I know the Saints debated taking him at several spots. Like him a lot. Yet another guy that Sage takes, and I'm going to hate facing him, just like half the guys they took last year. Man, it's going to be ugly, but Gunderson's a guy I like a lot. And then Mario Ruff, not to discount him, the highest of their mid-round picks, but like that guy a lot. I think I had him as the 3rd strong safety. Not sure how everybody else was on that, but yeah. So yeah, we had him as the 3rd strong safety behind Davis and Williams. So he was a guy we would have considered if Davis had gone earlier or if we had traded out of the 1st round. But yeah, 3 picks. Love them all for the Falcons there. Fuck the Falcons. Next.
Yeah, I think they did pretty good. I mean, none of those guys are really standout guys. I think what they'll do is they'll fill in very, important backup roles, and that's never a bad thing to do in the mid-rounds there. So we'll move on to another NFC South person in Coster and see what he has to say.
Firstly, I'd like to apologize for not drafting Gunderson with the pick we took Avery with. Secondly, I'm going to avoid the NFC South here. I'm going to talk about the Rams. I really like what they did, and I'm not even that impressed with the Julio Dunn pick. I'm more impressed with what he did in the 4th and 5th rounds. I like Ethan Crockett out of Alabama, the national title MVP in 2018. Very solid player there. They got their hands on Kevin Marshall. I know a lot of teams were looking at him in the later rounds. They just happened to be his landing spot. I think that's a very good pick. David Thompson of Stanford. That's pretty solid. Connor Crane is an underrated prospect, I feel. He was the guy blocking for Terrence Rogers for most of the season, getting him the room on the outside for him to do his damage. That's a very solid pick. I think Crane will be a big name down the line. And then you got Jerry Thornton out of a strong Texas Tech defense. That's a pretty solid pick with the very last pick in the 5th round. Rams did very solid. Got a couple nice players, and I think they passed the draft with a nice grade.
Okay, yeah, I think all four of those answers actually are pretty good. I think those teams really. One common thing in common mostly was that they all had lots of picks, so it's hard not to succeed when you have lots of picks. It's easier to hit. But I think all four of those teams did really well. I think we had some good picks in there. I know a lot of people didn't like the talent, but I think in the 3rd through 4th, 5th round, I think there was some solid backup talent that you could maybe look to starting in 2 or 3 years. So I think that wasn't an awful draft as people think it is. Which brings us to the end of the podcast that took over an hour. So I want to thank Bingo, Neo, Cricket, and Coster, and I want to apologize for us starting half an hour late due to technical difficulties. I know there's some teams we didn't talk about. No, most notably the Jags. I think I had a pretty solid draft. So you guys have any last words you want to say besides fuck the Falcons?
No, you took words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I will say that like I know we've had some in the shout box who feel like we've been picking on the Chiefs. There's a run on defensive ends, and you have a need at the position, so you take your guys. Like it's fine, but it is what it is. There was only 4 picks. Terrence Rogers is probably your best pick, but I don't know. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It could have been worse. If you'd taken Jared Self at 27, if he'd been available, I probably would have just shit all over you. But you know what? Could have been worse. I like the Luke Lyles pick. I like it a lot. I like Fred Young in the 6th round. And I think you took him a little high, but I like Terrence Rogers. So I don't want you to feel like I'm shitting on the Chiefs because I like some of what you did. It's just I just don't. I mean, honestly, if you'd waited until 40 and taken McManus there, I would have been singing your praises this whole podcast. So yeah, I don't hate the Chiefs. Just I just don't like Isaiah Hall. That's all I got.
That's fair. Isaiah Hall, I don't think did anything, so I think that Isaiah Hall hatred isn't fairly justified. So, Cricket, you got anything last minute things you want to talk about, or something you want to say?
Not much.
I know a trade did just happen, so I don't know if we want to talk about that real quickly.
It's a trade. I'm reading it now. It's just a trade.
Yeah, I mean, none of those guys are ever really going to provide much. I know San Diego's probably improved in a couple of positions, but those guys aren't very good.
Wait, is that our 7th rounder, Ian?
What number was it?
It's a 2021. So
yeah.
We're not going to know until.
Yeah, we don't know what the order is.
Well, it says San Diego's, so it's probably there.
Okay.
Yeah, they would probably have to specify if it was ours or not.
Yeah. Okay, well, want to thank you guys for joining, and thank you to Bingo who had to leave early. I think we had a lot of fun. We talked a lot of shit, and I think we got through a lot of good discussions here. So we are going to leave that.